Welcome to another episode of Culture 8 Podcasts, brought to you by Ezini, your trusted partner in building thriving workplace cultures. Here we explore the intricate and dynamic world of organization culture, uncovering insights and strategies to help leaders and teams foster environments where people and business grow together. In this episode, we are talking to Joe DeRozier, generative AI leader at Koch Industries. No, not the Coke beverage. Welcome to the podcast, Joe. It's an honor to host you on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me, Gaurav. Very much appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Well, before we dive deeply into the views and beliefs about organization cultures, I would like to ask you a question to allow our audience to get to know you better. What was your very first job?
It depends on if it's my first tax-paying job or my first job altogether. So my my dad was an entrepreneur growing up, and so my first job that I remember is he owned some convenience stores, and I used to sweep the front of the stores for donuts as my payment. So that was so I started working really young age for him and his different businesses.
Wow, very cool. And what was your, let's say, tax W-2 or?
It was a restaurant, so I had the typical restaurant jobs, as a teenager, in the kitchen and bussing tables, waiting, like that sort of thing.
Very cool, very cool. Thank you for sharing. What are the top 3 elements that define your organization culture, and how do you see these elements influence your company's success?
And yeah, so our company, Koch Industries, or Koch Inc., as we've recently changed our name, is a principle-based management company. And we really have 8 principles and 5 dimensions and that we go by. So it's hard to say, hey, these are the 3. But as I think about them, it's things like integrity, humility, respect, principled entrepreneurship, stewardship, and compliance, to name a few. So.
Wow, very cool. And how do you think these elements are influencing your company's success?
I think they're a major part of our success. We really, in my words, they're like our secret sauce, is the way I like to say it. So Coke believes that we can, purchase any company, and I use any loosely, that has a good value prop in the market, and improve that business by applying our principles and our culture to that business.
Oh, wow. That is amazing. That is a big, how do you say? I think that's a tall claim. I mean, it's very difficult for sure to do something like that. I'm coming from my personal experience, and if your company is able to do that, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, I think Coke owns a lot of different businesses, and they're diverse. Everything from, oil refinery to electronics, component production to forestry products like Georgia Pacific. And I think in every one of those, we're seeking to apply our principles and our culture, when we purchase those companies. And I think Coke's a very successful company, so I would say it does work. It's not perfect. It's a process, and it takes a long time depending on the company, where they're at, how many employees they have, their geographic and kind of dispersion. But yeah, absolutely, our culture is the most important thing to Coke.
Wow, fantastic! Yeah, it's not easy. It take time. Definitely takes time.
Yeah,
fantastic. Can you share a quick example of a recent culture initiative and its impacts?
And I'm biased in my answer here. So because of you introduced me as generative AI leader, so my focus the last few years has been on generative AI. And one of the ideas that came forth from one of our employees early on was, how do we take all of the information we have on principle-based management, which we have a public website, principlebasedmanagement.com, anybody can go visit. How do we take that information and apply generative AI to it so that people are have a new way to engage it and ask, really specific questions in regard to their job and their role and how they apply those principles. So the initiative that launched in production this year is something that we call Ask Fred. And Ask Fred is it's a virtual principle-based management coach. So you can go into Ask Fred, start a chat like a lot of chat bots, and really just talk about our culture and have a very good, I'll say, in-depth conversation on any of our principles, and while leveraging kind of the power of generative AI. So I can have it say it in my language. I can have it say it in analogies that mean something to me. If I want to put it in a football or cricket analogy, I can do that. And I can role play as well. So if I need to have a difficult conversation with an employee that maybe doesn't understand our compensation philosophy, and maybe I've tried to explain it in my way, but I can go into this tool, this chatbot tool, and have a text or verbal conversation to say, I've talked to Gaurav and I've explained our compensation philosophy, but this is kind of his feedback. Can you help me explain that in a way that really could connect with him based on these attributes? And it'll go through and help you do that. So that's a recent initiative. And Koch's a pretty big place, so I'm not happy with the number that I'm about to give, but we went from 0 users, because we just launched this year, to about 6,000 unique monthly users a month.
That is huge. I mean,
yeah, it depends on your perspective. I think it needs to be bigger, but
yes.
From 0 to 6,000 within this calendar year is pretty good.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything is better than 0, right? I mean,
yeah.
So that is awesome. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. I think I've done this for a while, and a lot of leaders talk about the different culture initiatives, and none of them are really how to use the technology to bring out the change in the organization culture. So this is phenomenal. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
What is one major challenge you faced regarding organizational culture, and how did you overcome it?
What is one challenge that we face from an organizational perspective?
Culture perspective, yes. And how did you overcome that challenge?
Well, there's lots of challenges, and I don't know that there's ever you've overcome it and you're there and you've arrived. I don't think there's ever you've arrived and overcome.
Right.
It's a constant journey that you're on, and I don't know what to pick there. There's a lot of them. I mentioned buying companies. So whenever Koch purchases a company, our culture can be foreign to them. It's quite a bit different than your typical corporate America culture. So there's a lot of education and thinking. One of the challenges or one of the opportunities, I'll call it, that we face, particularly with new companies, is what we call our challenge process. It's part of our knowledge principle, and we believe that all ideas are open for challenge, right? We challenge ideas and not the person, yes. Regardless of title, position, seniority, and those sorts of things, in a respectful way. And we believe in doing so, you end up in a better spot, right? So good ideas can come from anywhere in the organization. Just because you have a certain position or title doesn't mean that you know everything and all your ideas are good. So we engage often in that respectful challenge process, right, to get to a better spot on whatever idea or conversation that is. In the kind of like, to use your word overcome, it's probably not the best word, but the way we address that is just through practice, right? Is making sure that, hey, we want to create an environment where you feel okay, you feel safe to share your ideas. But you also have to be the right person. That's why our culture is so important, to have the humility to understand that, just because you challenged an idea, you may not be right either, right? So it's really about that back and forth of challenging the idea and then using data, right, and experience, and those sorts of things to end up in the right spot.
Very cool. I mean, so I can understand that, and the word psychological safety comes into mind. As soon as you said it, I figured out like Koch Industries Inc. is really focusing on creating an environment which is psychologically safe. Everyone has a seat at the table. Everyone's voice is heard. Ideas can come from anywhere, any age. It does not matter, and it might be valuable. Fantastic.
Yeah, and we try to do that with our interns, and we engaged our interns that came in May this year with generative AI, and
Right.
and we asked them, it's like, look, you're fresh to all of this, so if you're seeing ways to apply this technology, because again, that's where I'm coming from,
Yeah.
in ways that we haven't thought of, we want to hear them, because those fresh eyes and not burdened by your experience can be very helpful, right? And
Yeah.
can give you new ways to think about things.
New perspective and unbiased. I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. All right, cool. Amazing conversation. I love it. It's just totally different perspective from all the CEOs and the CEOs that I've had on the conversation. So that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. What is one trend you see shaping the future of organizational cultures?
That's a great question. Um, I think the way I'm going to answer that is, I think the workforce has changed. And I believe, and I might be wrong, but that some leaders are failing to grasp how things have changed and the expectations from the younger generation that's coming up. And so in the past, come to work, sit at your desk, work 40 hours a week, do what you're told. Those sorts of, that does not resonate with the younger generation at all. And so I think the newer folks coming into the workforce value flexibility. They really want to be purpose driven, and I don't use the phrase psychological safety. I don't know that I think it's a bad one. It's just not one in my vocabulary a lot. But I think that's an important aspect of things, right? They want to be seen. They want to be heard. They want to know that they're making a difference in whatever they're doing.
Yes.
And the more you can connect folks to that purpose and how they fit into the purpose, and how they're making a difference towards that purpose or that end, is extremely important. Where I think maybe in the past it wasn't as important, right? It
Yeah.
was more I'm just here to do a job, collect my paycheck, and go home. And it's just not fulfilling. It's not what people want. And I think people want more of that purpose in their job and in their life as the job can bring it than before. So I think that's a change over from generation to generation.
Fair enough. And I'm speaking just from my personal experience and probably from folks that I've talked about in rather my peers. And I would say that it's not just generational. I think I probably would gravitate to an organization which believed in the purpose and believed in the purpose of the individuals as well, and would help them to have a say in the organization's success. So I think that is something which is changing in an entire workforce mindset perspective from not just generational, right? But that's just,
I hope
I
so.
could be.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. What is one piece of advice you would give leaders about fostering a positive organizational culture?
I have what I believe on that. So a positive, it becomes down to your individuals, right? So first of all, you got to set the example as a leader, recognize that leaders get what they create and what they allow. So if you're pointing your finger out into the organization, you probably need to look in the mirror as well, because that's what you get. You get what you create and what you allow as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And then what I typically tell people is that when you think about employees, I usually mention four things that I believe employees value, and one of them we already mentioned, and that's purpose, right? So connecting to your employees to their purpose in the organization, right, and ensuring that they feel that purpose.
Yes.
Second is, and these aren't in any kind of order, but is mastery. Every individual wants to know that they're good at what they do, right? So helping your employees to become masterful, or getting them to a point or recognizing that they're good at what they do, that level of mastery.
Right.
The third one is very variable depending on the individual, but autonomy, right? So people, depending on where they're at in their career, but more so as you get further along in your career, you value some level of autonomy. So don't micromanage, right? So you got to have some trust. You got to let people fail sometimes, and then learn from those failures. And then the last thing is a good relationship with their supervisor. If you don't have a good relationship with the direct person that you're reporting to, you are much more likely to leave your job. So I think if you have those four elements and your role as a leader is helping to develop those things, it won't be perfect and all that, and it's a little different depending on the individual, but thinking about those four elements and trying to apply them in your organization is going to help you be more successful and retain employees that are really passionate about what they do, which is really important, right? Because if you're not, if they're not, happy with those relationships, understand their purpose, feeling like they're obtaining or realizing some level of mastery and autonomy over their work, they're just not going to produce the same for you than if you don't have those elements in some level.
Spot on, and it resonates so well with me. It's the intrinsic motivation that you're speaking of, right? You build that intrinsic motivation for that extra oomph that you might say in productivity, or the just the performance of the individuals as well, right? I love it. It's the purpose that you talked about, right? Microsoft says it very well. You won't work for Microsoft until Microsoft works for you. Use the Microsoft platform to build your own organization, right? To build your own, to seek your own purpose. Mastery you talked about, and I just recently wrote an article about the fact that we should stop like the word of empowerment. We should have leadership stop using that word, because who are we to think about empowering anybody, right? The power comes from within. The fact that you talked about mastery is, so if you're talking about creating that ownership that you want to give them, you will have to build it in an environment where their competencies increase. You increase their technical skills, because now you've given them the ownership. You've given them the trust. You hold the trust in them that they will be able to achieve their objective, but you give them the competency that allows them to fulfill their work, right? And then the autonomy, right? The aspect, change the word from empower, go to ownership, give them the ownership. And relationships, something sorry, go ahead.
Now you were just reminded me of something else I say occasionally, which is people, I'm trying to remember now, of course, people support that which they own and create, right? So if you don't in kind of imbibe any kind of level of ownership over whatever it is, and they don't feel that, they're less likely to support it, right? I don't want to make it black and white, but they're less likely to support it. So, so I'll just say it again: people support that which they own and create, and so that's an important aspect of things.
Love it. I love it. Every aspect of everything you said, it highly resonate with all of it. And that ownership, the relationship fact that you mentioned, right? I'm seeing it, and this is something which I read in Edgar Schein's book, Organization, Cultures, and Leadership. And it's the fact that he talks about 4 different kind of levels of relationship. 0 is like, the jail and the jailer and the convicts over there. The level 1 is the transactional relationships, and 2 is where you have a support, or rather trust in other fellow human beings or fellow peer or organization individual that you're working with. The fact that you will support them and they will support you, right? We all need to get to that aspect. And that's my personal belief, of course, that if you want to get to the evolution of the next stages of organizations and the culture, we need to have those level 2 relationships, move away from transactional relationships. At least that's what I think about it. So cool. Awesome. Great conversation on organization cultures. Let's move the target on to you. What is the book do you recommend the most?
From a leadership perspective, it's always 2 that I mentioned just because I liked them. And one of was Leadership and Self-Deception. And and I don't remember the author's name at the moment, so I should have been prepared for that. And then the other is Boundaries in Leadership, which is a great book. I
Very
just
cool.
really like that book. I think it was Henry Cloud, if that's right. But Boundaries in Leadership, I think, is a great book.
Thank you. That is awesome. Again, every leader I speak to, I get loads of information about kind of books that I should be reading, and I rather putting it on my list. So it's
Yeah.
growing. It's ever growing. It's not decreasing. It's hard. Um, what's one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
Yeah. Yeah, that's always tough. It's hard to say because what are people surprised by these days? I don't know. I really don't know. Personally, I'm a little bit of a nerd. Probably not surprising given my what I do for a living, but 3D printing, LED lighting is kind of like my hobbies, and when I get to do them, like woodworking. Uh, yeah. So
All right, cool.
yeah,
No, and I've seen those, and they look really cool. The way the transitions happening within the lights itself, it's fantastic. I loved it. I wish I had that kind of a capability of printing out and stuff. But cool,
yeah.
awesome. Thank you. And one last question: how can our listeners connect with you?
LinkedIn. If I don't know if the podcast will have a spelling of my last name, but yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best way. If you want to connect with me, I'm not super fast at responding to LinkedIn messages. I'll try to get better at that. But I would go to LinkedIn and look for me there.
Awesome. And yes, you will. I will be putting in your photograph and the name and the website as well, so they'll have the full, first name and last name in there. So cool. Thank you. Well, there you have it, folks. Another great episode, and we've thank you, Joe, for being a guest on our podcast. I appreciate everything that you said, and I'm sure our audience will as well. Thank you again. It was a great
Thank
honor.
you. Yeah, I really appreciate you having me. It's been fun. Thank you.
Thank you.